Fuck this semester, am I right? I really hope you can't tell how dirty my glasses are. So the last semester roundup I did was entitled The Semester from Hell, because it was. This semester was too, if not worse, in different ways, but I still got to read a lot of really great stuff. So let's talk about it. I'm only going to be talking about 2 classes, but between those 2 classes we have 9 books, so I think we're going to be okay. The first class was on Indigenous women's life writing, which was incredible. This class was amazing, wonderful, fantastic. Adjectives. As blanket statements for the texts that we're about to discuss, they were all amazing and incredible, so I'm not going to say it for each one. Also, there was many themes that we returned to as we were discussing these books. Very discussion-based class, and I learned a lot through that. And those are the fact that we looked at our own positionality in reading these stories and how they applied to our lives, what we can take away from them, as well as things like the politics of production, because all of these books, except for one, was written in collaboration with a settler, non-Indigenous, or someone who is not from the community that is being discussed by the women. So I can assure you that these books were read critically and respectfully. Also, blanket statement, content warnings for racialized, sexualized violence. The book that we started off with was Lakota Woman by Mary Crow Dog, told in collaboration with Richard Erdos. So this is about Mary growing up throughout her life, and it discusses her involvement with the American Indian movement, or AIM, in the 1970s and the 1980s, and her involvement at Wounded Knee, where she gave birth. Oh my god! And about all the fallout that happened after Wounded Knee in Pine Ridge. The second book that we read was I, Rigoberta Menchú, an Indian woman in Guatemala, and it discusses the story of Rigoberta Menchú and her involvement in the Guatemalan Civil War. This book is definitely the most brutal book in the course, one of the most brutal books I've ever read, but it has so many beautiful descriptions of her life, because before she gets into her resistance movements and, you know, how she was resisting and organizing during the war, she talks so much about her family and her traditions and her beliefs. And, you know, we talked about how one way of reading that is that she's trying to show you like what she's fighting for. The next book was Enough is Enough, Aboriginal Women Speak Out, which is told from the perspective of the Tobique woman, as well as in collaboration with Janet Silman, and the last one was in collaboration with Elizabeth Burgos de Bray, who was a Venezuelan ethnographer. Forgot to mention that. But this is about the story of the Tobique woman who are from the Tobique Reserve in New Brunswick, who took on the Indian Act, which is one of the most oppressive pieces of legislation, certainly in Canada, as well as like ever. And it specifically is oppressive towards Indigenous women. So they took it on in various different ways, in turn, like legally, public support, all this stuff. So this book, again, they're all incredible, but incredible for so many reasons, because it's basically like a manual for social change in so many ways. And we actually got the chance to meet Janet Silman because she lives near my university, and she was really fucking cool. And that just, you know, that makes you feel good because of how much we talk about the politics of production and all the stuff around that. Like, to know that she just like seemed to get it and like was aware of the history of objectifying Indigenous women, history that continues, and how she was trying not to do that. And I don't know, it was heartening to hear, you know. So if you're really interested in learning about Canadian legislation in regards to Indigenous peoples and the, you know, recent history surrounding that, I would definitely recommend this. The second last book is one that I felt like in a lot of ways I learned the most from it, and that is The Book of Jessica, A Theatrical Transformation, told by Linda Griffiths and Maria Campbell. So in the 80s, I think it was, Maria Campbell wrote a book called Half-Breed, which was about her experience and life as a Métis woman, and it's one of the seminal texts, it was my understanding that it was, in terms of how it opened the gates for a lot of these books in this class. And so later, Maria Campbell ended up working in collaboration with Theatre Passamarai, which is based in Toronto, and specifically Linda Griffiths, who was a settler, where they collaborated to create Jessica as a play, which was supposed to be loosely based on Maria Campbell. And so it was these really, really intense, wounding experience of working together, and they fell out after the first production of the play, and then they were both not over it, and Linda Griffiths reached out to her and wanted to do another draft of the play, and instead of just publishing just the play as is in the back, they wanted to include the story and talking about their experience in leading up to it. So one of the readings that we did of this book is suggesting that talking about the relationship between Griffiths and Campbell could be seen as a look at how ugly an actual reconciliation process could be. The last book that we read for that class was My Place by Sally Morgan. This book is set in Australia. The last book that we looked at for that class is My Place by Sally Morgan, which is set in Australia, and it's about Sally growing up not knowing that she is Indigenous, and her mom and grandma kind of keeping that a secret from her, and then finding out that she is Indigenous, or Aborigine, I think is the correct term, and she realizes that none of their history is told in like mainstream history textbooks or like how history is discussed in Australia. So she decides to write her family's history. And because you can never win, in order to counter all those amazing texts from Indigenous women from all over the world, it was followed up by the thoughts and feelings of old dead white dudes in my post-Enlightenment political theory class. We started right away with Kant, with Perpetual Peace and other essays. I used to think that I hated Kant, which I think may have been because I was studying like specifically just his moral theory and philosophy, and not so much how that relates to his political theories. I mean, there's just not a particular fan of consequentialism. There's also the whole masturbation is worse than murder thing I'll never be able to get over. But I actually didn't agree with him on a lot of stuff. However, this was probably my favorite reading experience. Next, we got into this, which is Karl Marx Selected Writings, compiled by David McClellan. As much as I appreciate Marxist analysis, reading his work is like reading a fucking manual. It's so boring. The things I did find interesting were when he was talking about like the 5 moments of alienation and the economic and philosophical manuscripts, and, you know, talking more about his like human species being. I always say species because I'm a dick, you know? Then we got into John Stuart Mill. On Liberty, Utilitarianism, and other essays. I feel like J.S. Mill is the most easy to read because his ideas are the most familiar to us. And I feel like he replaced Kant and how much I loathe him. I don't like him. I don't. He's there. I don't love utilitarianism. I don't love his enthusiasm for colonialism. Like all of them, actually. Except for Kant. Not enthusiastic about it, yet was the most racist of all of them. And then we have the thing that was slightly redeemable about this course, and that was Nietzsche on the genealogy of morality. So I did not read a single word of this book. However, there are notes in it for my open book exam. Fight the system. I really enjoyed this, actually, and his ideas and thoughts. I don't agree with everything, okay? Don't come for me. However, what I really appreciate is his writings on like historical progress and how that's envisioned in the post-Enlightenment period. Because all of these individuals had a particular vision of how historical progress and change happened, through what mechanisms and what end goal they thought it was headed towards. Nietzsche was like, no, fuck you. He was like, how dare you think of a goal and then retroactively go back and look at history to confirm that it's moving towards what you want it to. Don't do that. He was like, history has no intention. Evolution didn't occur with the intention of creating humans. It just happened. Yes, Nietzsche. So that was everything I read this last semester. Thank you for watching and being here with me. I'm gonna go finish this. Cheers!